Hi, my name is Trainmaster04, and in this project review, I'll be reviewing Lionel's newest rendition of the fabled Pennsylvania Railroad L1 class Mikado, and in this case, it is a special version from Mr. Muffins Trains. So sit back, relax, and let's get right to it.
Union Pacific 4014. Do you read me? Over. Roger that. Union Pacific 4014. I copy that. Over. Start up and stand by. Over. Yes, sir. Start up and stand by. Out.
To start this video off right, let's get into the history. Pennsylvania Railroad number 2864 is considered a Mikado-type steam locomotive with a 2-8-2 wheel arrangement underneath the boiler. She was one of 574 sisters built between 1914 and 1919 by 3 manufacturers. The first being the Juniata shops, which were responsible for 344 examples, whopping number. The second is the Baldwin Locomotive Works with 205 examples, which 2864 is a part of that fleet, and then the Lionel Locomotive Works having 25. Overall, these locomotives were used for heavy freight service along the PRR, and surprisingly were actually hand-fired and also had manual reversers. However, those were later changed, such as the mechanical stokers being added by 1947, 512 locomotives in total, having mechanical stokers, and also most of the locomotives receiving automatic reversers. However, these locomotives were eventually phased out and put onto the service storage line during the Great Depression as the Pennsylvania Railroad introduced the I-1s 210-0 decapods and then later in 1923 the M1 482 mountain classes. Both those classes proved to be even more efficient and more powerful than the Mighty Mikes, and as a result they were put in storage. However, during World War II, these locomotives did see a second life. During and after World War II, these locomotives, like many other steam locomotives, were put to their working orders and were pushed to the brink of near exhaustion. They also saw many different types of modifications, such as in-cab signaling, as this little box right here indicates, and is nicely detailed with conduits going back to the cab. They were also equipped with teleradio communication, so sometimes you'll see examples of these locomotives having radio antennas along the boilers. And then also in post-World War II, the headlights and dynamos were also changed in their position. After World War II, the headlights were put in front of the smokestack, and then the dynamos were put onto a platform closer to the front of the smoke box. However, in this model, you can see this is still pre-World War II. The locomotives also were made and designed to actually be compatible with the K4s. Most of the locomotives' boilers were almost identical to the K4s themselves and many other parts. So, if a locomotive such as a K4 was out of commission because a part was not available, a simple L1 can be swapped out with the K4, or a part in this case can be swapped out and simply be put onto the K4. As a result, the K4s and the L1s were quite popular with each other and became versatile when it came to servicing. During the L1's careers, some of them actually were sold to a number of different railroads. For instance, 4 were sold to the Lehigh and New England Railroad in 1941, 2 were sold off to the Cambria and Indiana Railroad the same year, 3 went to the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, or just Santa Fe for short, in 1945, which you can actually pre-order, or in this case, order one of those examples from Lionel. And in 1948, 2 locomotives were sold to the Interstate Railroad and 2 to the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton Railroad. As a result, a number of these locomotives survived on other rails. Now, speaking of survival, there is unfortunately 1 locomotive still left in preservation to this day, representing this massive class of locomotives. In this case, it is L1S number 520. Number 520 was built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in December of 1916. However, she had a rough career on the Pennsylvania Railroad. While pulling a freight from Altoona, Pennsylvania to Conway, Pennsylvania on November 14, 1942, during World War II, the boiler on 520 exploded near Creason. In most cases, a railroad would deem this locomotive unfit for service after a boiler explosion and would typically register it off as scrap since the PRR already had a number of them. However, this locomotive had the opposite effect. The locomotive was put back into service, and later in the year, during the end of the steam era, Number 520, which remained in service until almost the end of steam operations, hauled one of the last steam-powered trains in the PRR sector by a railfan special between Enola Yard and the Northumberland, Pennsylvania. Shortly after that service, it was added to the PRR's historic locomotive collection in Northumberland Roundhouse and followed most of that collection to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, located in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. It was then later added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. So overall, number 520, even though she faced a devastating career on the PRR with a boiler explosion, she was able to be resurrected and is now a proud, preserved article of the L1 class. As a result, we now can view the L1s with great stride in both film and in person. With the history of the real L1 class locomotives, let's go ahead and go over the stats and facts that this model has to offer. This model was recently released in Lionel's 2022 Volume 2 catalog and soon starts showing up in dealers and privately owned hands around late June to early July of 2022. For the measurements, this locomotive has a combined length of 21 3/4 of an inch, making this locomotive have a minimum curve radius of 0.42. Now, I do want to make a slight note here on the curve radius. I did run it around the 0.36 section of my layout very slowly, and the locomotive did go around the curves. However, it was a little grumpy about going around them, so I would still suggest using the 0.42 minimum curve radius, but if you had to use 0.36, use it sparingly. And also on another note, I just wanted to say that this locomotive isn't a first for Lionel, nor is it a first in the O-gauge world. If you haven't already found out or heard yet, this locomotive is actually a former MTH model. MTH has been making this model ever since PS1 was out. They've made it in Rail King Premier and also all the way up to PS3, and has become quite a handsome model in the modeling world. Lionel did purchase it during when MTH was downsizing their fleet of tooling and also management, and was able to revive it with legacy features on the inside and also a legacy Lionel USRA Mikado chassis and gearbox, which unfortunately the gearbox is having some signs of problems. So do keep an eye out when you do go and purchase one of these locomotives, and if you do have any gearbox problems, contact your dealer immediately so that you can start the process of getting that fixed. But with that, let's go into the model features. Under the hood, this model is powered by one large flywheel motor and is also equipped with two fan-driven smoke units, one located up front for the main smokestack and the other located for the smoking whistle. In order to fill both smoke units with smoke fluid, you simply pour your smoke fluid directly down the stack. There isn't a hidden hole for the smoking whistle. Instead, Lionel went ahead and opted to plumb the front smoke unit to the rear. So don't get confused when you get one of these models and you're like, where in the world is the fill hole? Just simply pour your smoke fluid directly down the stack. Also for electronics, this locomotive is equipped with Lionel's legacy rail sound, something far different from MTH's PS system. And for command control, this locomotive is also equipped with Lionel's legacy command system. And since this locomotive is produced after the Vision Line Class A's, that means this locomotive can be controlled with 5 different options. First being is using Lionel's soon-to-be Cap 3 command system, which would allow you to access the 4-digit operating system included in this locomotive. Second is using Lionel's Cap 2 command system, which would allow you to operate the locomotive with all of its features, including the Cap 3. Third is using Lionel's Team CC Cap 1 command system. And finally, you can use Bluetooth or even conventional control. With the model stats and facts out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to the details on this wonderful model. Starting at the front of the locomotive, here you can see we have the nicely detailed pilot. In this case, you can see we have 2 footboards for crews to stand on, a separately applied brake hose leading back into the locomotive itself, a coupler cut bar, and also a separately applied grab bar right next to 2 separately applied marker lights, which do come on when the locomotive is in operation and can be changed from green to white or even to off. At the end of the coupler cut bar, you can see it has separately applied chain leading straight into a dummy O-gauge coupler or O-scale coupler, which can be swapped out to be double-headed with another L1 or even a decapod. Up top, finally, here you can see we have an air compressor tank with separately applied piping coming off of it at either end, and also a platform leading up to the smoke box, which we'll take a look at right now. Moving up to the smoke box, here you can see it is nicely painted in that beautifully correct graphite gray paint scheme, which is nice to see considering Lionel's had an up and down battle with getting the shade correct. For details, you can see it is loaded with molded in rivet details, 2 molded in steps leading up to the upper portion of the boiler, is littered with grab irons and also handrails up and over the side of the smoke box. In the center, it has a molded in smoke box door with a number board which says 2864, and finally the main headlamp, which also has 2 illuminated marker boards on either side of the headlamp. Moving over to the engineer's side of the locomotive, starting at the bottom, here you can see we have the blank pilot wheel as well as the first cylinder of the 2 on this locomotive, which is nicely detailed with rivet detailing, a valve adjuster knob up top, and also nice looking single bar valve gear and various other details. Moving up, here you can see the beginning of the running board, which also has some nice safety tread up top, and also the in-cab signaling box with a conduit going off of it and up to the conduit system or the handrail on the side of the boiler. On the boiler itself, here you can see we have a legible builder's plate which has L1S and the Baldwin Locomotive Works stating that 2864 was a part of the Baldwin group, some rivet detailing along the graphite smoke box, and then also some sand pipes coming down from the sand dome. Continuing down the side of the locomotive, here at the bottom you can see we have the 8 driving wheels for this locomotive as well as the polished side rods and the Walschaerts valve gear. Up top here you can see we have a separately applied automatic reverser, separately applied pipework that goes along underneath the running boards, the separately applied air compressor tank which is correctly moved to accommodate for the power reverser. And then on the side of the boiler itself, we've got some molded in boiler bands, a nice bulge in the side of the boiler where it transitions from the combustion chamber to the boiler itself, and also the continuation of that black handrail. Coming to the end of the locomotive, looking at the firebox and cab area, here you can see we have the iconic Pennsylvania Railroad Belfair firebox style, which is also nicely detailed with various separately applied pipework for the injectors, lever linkage for the power reverser, the end of the handrail, and also the end of the pipework going underneath the running board. For the firebox itself, since this locomotive is a coal burner, this locomotive is equipped with an ash pan and the ash pan variable glow effect, and in this case it does look nice and detailed with molded in rivet detailing and also a dark graphite color. At the bottom here you can see we have a separately applied water injector piece underneath the cab and also the rear pilot truck. In this case it is nicely detailed with molded in castings. And finally, looking at the cab itself, as you can see it is nicely detailed and painted in that Tuscan red and also lettered with the 2864 in gold. Has 2 windows, in this case 2 of which do both slide in different positions as you can see here, and are nicely painted in a bright Pensy red and have clear plastic inserts on them. There's a nice little molded in sunshade over the windows and a separately applied grab iron over the windows themselves. Moving on around to the back end of the locomotive and looking inside the cab, as you can see it is nicely detailed with a beautiful array of hand painted and separately applied valves, gauges on the back head, and in the center has a raging fire coming through the holes in the firebox door. It is equipped with 2 hand-painted crew figures, one for the fireman and one for the engineer, and is also illuminated with a nice cab back headlight which comes on when the locomotive is standing still. Coming outside of the cab, here you can see we have 3 separately applied cab curtains which are reminiscent to the MTH days for this model, 2 windows for the back panel of the cab with clear plastic inserts, and finally 2 separately applied grab irons on either side of the cab. On top of the boiler, starting over at the right and moving to the left, here you can see we have a separately applied dynamo generator located between the headlight and smokestack, which makes this model representing a locomotive either after World War II or pre-war World War II. Next, you can see we have the smokestack, which this locomotive is equipped with 2 fan-driven smoke units, one for the main smokestack and one for the smoking whistle. Both smoke units are connected, so when you pour smoke fluid directly down the smokestack, you are feeding both smoke units. Continuing down, here you can see we have the molded in sand dome with 2 molded in hatches and a brass bell, which honestly Looks really good. I'm glad Lionel is trying to go back to the correct brass color instead of having a painted bell that doesn't look like actual brass. Continuing down towards the end of the locomotive, here you can see we have the whistle and steam drum with various details. In this case, the whistle is a single chime banshee whistle, which is prototypically correct for this locomotive, and is equipped with a whistle cord, which you typically don't see on Lionel models, but in this case, since this is a former MTH model, this is correct. Also, you can see we have a separately applied whistle steam shield right next to a pair of brass poppet valves, which also look good. Continuing down the Belfair firebox and to the cab, here you can see we have various separately applied pipework and water equipment. The turret with a molded in hatch door up top, and then the cab itself is nicely detailed with molded in rivet detailing, and in the center a separately applied hatch which can be moved back and forth. And finally, taking a quick look at the fireman's side of the locomotive, and as you can see, it is pretty much the same as compared to the engineer's side, but there are a few minute differences, such as a different running board configuration, the addition of a separately applied cross-compound air compressor, and various pipework going along the side of the boiler. Moving over to the tender, starting up front, at the bottom here you can see we have the tender end of the infrared drawbar, and accompanied with it are two large molded in steps leading up to the tender deck. Here you can also see we have two separately applied grab irons and two molded in toolbox hatches leading into the tender itself. And then finally at the back face or front face of the tender, here you can see we have four molded in coal door hatches so that when the coal load starts to go down, the crew can open up another set of doors and access the coal a little easier. Looking at the engineer's side of the tender, and as you can see, the side panel of the tender is pretty standard for a Pennsylvania short tender, and really is nicely detailed for a modest tender, with molded in rivet detailing, the Pennsylvania logo across the center in the Tuscan gold paint scheme, has some separately applied grab irons as shown earlier, and then at the bottom, a set of two four-wheel trucks with uniquely chains separately applied to both ends of the trucks, something that was quite popular with MTH locomotives, and again, I'm quite glad that Lionel kept it on this model. Moving on around to the back of the tender, at the bottom here you can see we have two more footboards for crews to stand on, two molded in steps leading up to the rear deck, a separately applied coupler cup bar, and also a separately applied grab iron, and then in the center we have the rear electrocoupler for this model. This electrocoupler can be thrown by either using Lionel's Legacy, Team CC, or even Bluetooth command control system. Looking at the back panel itself, it is also nicely painted in that Tuscan red with the PRR up top, two separately applied grab irons and a separately applied ladder leading up top, and then on the top deck of the tender itself we have two more separately applied marker lights which do come on when the locomotive is in operation and can be changed from colors of red, white, or even turned off. And finally, towards the off side of the tender, we have a rear backup light, and similar to the headlamp, it too comes on when the locomotive is put into reverse, and also has two illuminated number boards on either side of it. Finally, on top of the tender, and as you can see, it too is also modestly detailed, with a realistic hull load over onto the right, some molded in rivet detailing along the water tank paneling, and also two water hatches which do open to reveal old switch holes for the former MTH technology inside the tender. With both the locomotive and tender covered, let's go ahead and fire up this model and go over some of the sound features.
Trainer and brakeman, let's get an application for continuity test. Good application, okay to release. Trainer and brakeman, we have good set, good release, good continuity on timetable train number 1. Over.
That's a roger. Good set, good release, good continuity on timetable train number 1. Out.
With the locomotive fired up, let's go over the sound features. First up, here are the 5 coolable whistles. Here's the steam blowdown sound. Here's the water and coal fill-up sounds.
The water's full. Out. The coal's full. Out.
And finally, here is a sampling of both the crew and tower comm chatter.
Dispatcher, the air test is complete. Am I clear to make a move? Over.
Hold your position. Out. Got a lot of tonnage today. Better butt you in some slack before we start out. Ash pans are empty.
Dispatcher, made up. Am I clear to the outbound? Over.
You're cleared outbound. Dispatcher out.
Alrighty, I got a train hooked up behind the tender. We've been given the green signal, so let's go ahead and move on out.
Dispatcher, cleared outbound. Over.
Roger that. Good run.
Dispatcher, going to the register room to sign out. Out.
That's about it for this product review, but before you go, let me go ahead and answer the two questions that I normally ask around this time of the video, and they are, what is the original MSRP price for one of these models, and also what is my personal opinion on it? Well, to start off, the original MSRP price from Mr. Muffins Trains is right at $950. However, right now, Mr. Muffins is currently running a sale for these custom models at right at $855. So if you hurry now, go and place your order while the sale's still going, and you may be able to save some money. On that same note, you may also want to get it right now, as these models are in limited production. So once they are gone, Mr. Muffins is no longer going to produce any more of these. So go stop by at Mr. Muffins and pick one up yourself. Now let's move over to my opinion. Overall, I am quite pleased with how Lionel came out with this model. I was quite skeptical of how Lionel was going to approach this model, in the fact that they would actually delete some of the iconic details on this model that was originally from MTH. But when it came out, I was so pleased to see that Lionel didn't do that, but in fact actually kept almost all, or in fact all of the products details on this model itself, and only updated it, such as legacy command features inside of it, and also whistle steam underneath the whistle. I'm quite pleased with how it came out, and I'm even happier that Lionel is actually working with those that have had bad models with some of the gearing problems. As I stated earlier on in this video, this model is somewhat being plagued with gearing problems, as were the K4s of the past, and thankfully the OGR forum is getting great responses from handy mechanics that have known these locomotives inside and out for many years and know how to solve these problems. And thankfully Lionel too is also stepping aboard along with those that are on the OGR forum to try to solve the problem. So far it has been solved and even rectified for most of those bad models. However, there are some of these that are just fine. On the front of Mr. Muffins, I'm quite happy and pleased with how they handled this model. The design of the paint scheme is very spot on, reminiscent to one of Lionel's old K4s with the same type of tender at the back, and also a similar paint scheme. It's not too vibrant where it looks too toyish, so to speak, such as a template model, but it's just subtle enough to be realistic, even though it is a what-if paint scheme. I am disappointed that they did not keep the telephone radio antennas on top of the boiler in the final production, which I cannot find a rendition photo of this exact model showing the antennas on the boiler. So somewhere along the way, Mr. Muffins decided to change their minds. But overall, it has turned out to be a great model for anybody that runs Pennsylvania. So overall, I'm quite happy with how the model turned out, and I would suggest it to anybody wanting an L1 and not wanting an MTH version. That's it for this video, but before you go, I just want to say thank you very much for clicking on this video and also watching it to the very end. It takes me a great deal of time to produce these high quality videos for you all to enjoy, so I do greatly appreciate your support. If you've enjoyed this video, please go ahead and click on that like button, as that lets me know that you have enjoyed this type of content so that I can go and produce even more. While you're at it, please also click on the subscribe button so that you'll no longer miss any of my future videos that I'll be producing in the near future. But anyway, my name is Trainmaster04, and I'll be seeing you next time.
See you next